The last third of the 18th century and the first of the 19th century witnessed the end of the old regime and the transition from the so-called modern age to the contemporary age. The political revolutions that took place in that period end absolutism and replaced it with new forms of government based on equality before the law, democracy, and individual freedom. The feudal class society ceased to exist, and in its place the capitalist class society was erected, articulated around two social groups, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The rebellion of the colonists that the United Kingdom posed in the North America constitutes the first bourgeois revolution and the precedent of other later ones, like French Revolution or American colonies of Spain. Its importance lay in the fact that for the first time a liberal political organization based on the ideological foundations of the Enlightenment was put into practice in a real and concrete way. The process that we know as the French Revolution meant the fall of the old regime in one of the most powerful countries in the world. The repercussions of this conflict did not exclusively affect France, but to a greater or lesser extent served as a reference for those in Europe who conspired against absolute monarchies and fought for the abolition of the inequalities of the feudal regime. The fundamental causes that originate the French Revolution were the monarchical absolutism, which was characterized by the unlimited power of the sovereign, whose authority was not subject to any control, the political and economic social inequality, and the lack of freedoms and rights. To these causes must be added an important factor, the powerful influence of new ideas. It ranged from the outbreak of the French Revolution in June 1789 to September 21, 1792, the date on which the monarchy was abolished. The States General were summoned by Louis XVI, King of France. They met at Versailles in April 5, 1789. The States General were a kind of assembly made up of 1,200 deputies, 300 for the clergy, 300 for the nobility, and 600 for the third estate. The economic crisis forced the French sovereign to reunite them so that they would adopt the most convenient measures. The third estate wanted to take advantage of said assembly to present favorable petitions to the people. The king and the nobility didn't take these reforms into account. The request that they did not take into account was the right to vote per head, which was favorable to them since they were in the majority, since they want the vote by order to subsist. Then the third state disrespect the order of Louis XVI and they admit separately. The National Assembly was created on June 17, 1789. It's the one that made the outbreak of the revolution. The king closed the session room to the National Assembly, which occupied the ballgame room, in which the deputies swore not to separate until they had given a constitution to France. The French sovereign yielded to the events of the National Assembly, inviting the three social classes to meet. This arose the Constituent Assembly. The king has lost his authority and the absolute monarchy was coming to an end. The main events are the taking of the Bastille. On July 14, 1789, the people of Paris attacked the Bastille fortress and occupied it. The Bastille was the symbol of despotism. The Great Fear was a wave of peasant riots and violence that swept through France in July and August 1789. These riots were sparked by economic concerns, rural panic, and the power of rumor. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was promulgated by the Assembly on August 26, 1789. Further rights had previously been abolished on August 4, 1789. The Constitution of 1791 was promulgated, of a monarchical tendency that sanctioned the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, as well as the existence of three powers: legislative, executive, and judicial. The civil constitution of the clergy was promulgated, by which the property of the church passed to the power of the state, and the appointment of ecclesiastical authorities would henceforth be made by the election of the people. 5. Of the king. Louis XVI tried to flee abroad, but was discovered in Varennes and later arrested and locked up in the Tuileries. This assembly was more hostile to the monarchy. The main events that arose during them were the declaration of war on Austria, when the first actions favored the Austro-Prussians, but the revolutionary armies under the command of Dumouriez won great victories at Valmy and Guimauves. The assault on the Tuileries and the definitive prison of Louis XVI. The appearance of political parties. The Fulden's was monarchists, the Girondists was moderate republicans, and the Jacobins was like the radical left. This is a stage that includes from September 21, 1792 to November 9, 1799, in which Napoleon Bonaparte gives the Count Brumaire 18th and establishes the consulate for his benefit. The government of the consulate, with Napoleon as absolute owner of France, was properly a stage of transition from the Republic to the Empire and lasted until 1804. When the Legislative Assembly was dissolved, the National Convention was formed. The main acts of said convention were: decreed abolition of the monarchy and proclaimed the Republic, sanctioned universal suffrage, and trial and sentence to death Louis XVI, execution that took place in January 1793. In this revolutionary government was formed that under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre implanted the era of terror and sent thousands of detainees and suspects to the gallows. Violence and cruelty reigned, because even the leaders themselves, such as Marat, Danton, etc., succumbed violently, as did Marie Antoinette, Lavoisier, and finally Robespierre himself was also executed by his enemies of the Convention. The government of terror was made up of three committees: that of the public salvation, that of the general security, and the Revolutionary Court. The National Convention promulgated the Constitution of Third Year, which established the Directory, a moderate republican government that had the following organization. The executive branch, in charge of the Directory, made up of 5 members, and the legislative power, formed by 2 councils, that of the 500 and that of the elderly. By the Count of Brumaire 18th, Napoleon abolished the Directory and established the Consulate, republican in appearance but properly monarchical in tendency. The establishment of the Consulate was sanctioned by the Constitution of Third Year. The Consulate consists of 2 branches. The executive branch, made up of 3 consuls, the main figure being the first consul, owner of the government, and the legislative power, which consists of a council of state, the tribunate, and a legislative body. 1815, Napoleon being proclaimed emperor by the Senate under the name of Napoleon I. From then on, it was Bonaparte's dearest desire to establish the universal monarchy. He inaugurated a personal absolute government. He surrounded himself with a brilliant court made up of his relatives and generals, to whom he bestowed noble titles. He gave great impetus to cultural activity, industry, and commerce. He issued wise laws. He dreamed of making France the first nation of the world. A powerful unit army faced Napoleon in Leipzig, defeating him. Then they occupied Paris. Napoleon abdicated the crown and was appointed sovereign of the island of Elba. The monarchy was reestablished with Louis XVIII as King of France. Napoleon did not resign himself to continue as king of the small island of Elba. The popularity of Louis XVIII facilitated his return to France. In March 1815, he remained in government 100 days. A powerful coalition army confronted Napoleon at Waterloo and defeated him. Napoleon did abdicate the crown and was later captured by the English. Taken prisoner to the island of St. Helena, he died in 1821. The Empire and Napoleon had come to the end. After the Battle of Waterloo, Louis XVIII returned to power in a second restoration, trying to exercise a moderate government that would safeguard part of the revolutionary heritage and limit the revanchism of the ultra-realists. It was not possible for him to maintain this middle way, and finally the Reich prevailed in the government from 1820. This reactionary line would continue under the reign of his successor, Charles X of France, making the continuity of the Bourbon dynasty unacceptable for the French, which would be dethroned by a new revolution in 1830.